policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. First of all, I want to thank Penna Dexter for covering the last 2 days, as we've kind of this week wanted to focus just a little time and attention on the fact that Point of View has been around for 45 years. I remember Gary Bauer the other day saying, I didn't know you'd been around that so long, and certainly that is the case. Marlon Maddox starting this program 45 years ago and then putting it up on satellite 10 years after that, and of course we have been broadcasting across the country through the nation, and of course now with the internet, it's amazing the number of emails and podcasts and others that are downloaded from other countries. So we certainly celebrate that, and we'll spend some time today getting into some of these very important issues. I will be joined in studio as time goes on. Everybody has schedules that have kept them from being with me at the outset, so I want to spend some time talking about one of the issues in the news, and that is the decision announced by the president to move the capital to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, which I think is not that controversial, but you would think that it was just one more step towards Armageddon. So we'll get into that in just a minute. As we are joined a little bit later by Dr. Nick Pitts, who will join us after doing a luncheon event, and then a little bit later by Colonel Alan West. We'll get into some of the other issues in the news. One of those is the whole credibility issue with the FBI. And in the past, of course, we've talked about the IRS and others, so that's one that we've posted some articles about. Yesterday, of course, we had a very important Supreme Court case, and we wanted to talk about that a little bit as we get the roundtable going. And, of course, we will also get into what about this tax reform issue. You have Jonah Goldberg writing about how to tell when deficits are bad. Cal Thomas, one of the articles we've posted here, Starving the Beast. Maybe it's about time to say it would be good, maybe we should cut back on the size and scope of the government. And, of course, there's a threat of even a government shutdown that could happen as early as Saturday. So we always have lots to talk about, and so we will certainly spend some time doing that. Then Colonel Alan West will have to leave us by the second hour, but we'll bring in Dr. Brent Taylor, who's been with us as well. Sometimes have done our Millennial Roundtable, so we'll see where that might lead as well. And as we go through the conversation, I would certainly encourage you to give us a call. That number is 1-800-351-1212. Well, let me take one issue, and that is one that I wanted to talk about. I wasn't sure my roundtable guest would be as interested, although Colonel West might have some thoughts about it, and that is the decision announced by President Donald Trump to actually fulfill a campaign promise, and that is to relocate the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv in Israel to Jerusalem. Now, let's face it. That has been a campaign promise going at least as far back as Ronald Reagan. I think I can actually find a very consistent number of presidents, both Republicans and Democrats, that have talked about that. Certainly Republicans have, of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. It's always a promise that is made, and it's a promise that's never kept. This time Donald Trump says, you know what? I'm going to try to keep it. Now, again, even as he makes this announcement, there, I believe, is going to be a short period of time in which there would be a waiver. So this is, of course, one of those issues that won't happen just instantaneously. But it has been one of those things that has been around for some time. I mean, I think you go back to 1995, there's actually a bill that was passed through Congress to call for that. And, of course, we are 3 presidents later since that has taken place. Now, again, the CNN, trying to help us out a little bit, said, well, why is declaring Jerusalem the capital such a big deal? And a lot of that, I think, has to do with, they say, the final status of Jerusalem has always been one of the most difficult and sensitive questions in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If the United States declares Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, it would be seen as prejudicing that, prejudging that question and deciding an issue that supposedly should be left to the negotiations. This is what I've been seeing today in the press. A number of people saying, look, This is going to inflame tensions in the Middle East. This is going to cause some problems. This is going to set back the peace process. My argument would be, I don't know where we're going in the peace process, but if the phone calls we've received over the last, and I've been doing this program for 30 plus years, are any indication, most of you are pretty much convinced that the peace process is going nowhere because it always is dependent upon Israel giving up land for peace and then never getting any peace. And so that's certainly the case. So again, a lot of people have said, well, this is something that's being announced, but it's going to take a long time to do. I disagree. Maybe I don't understand something, but even CNN pointed out that this could be really very simple. Because right now our embassy in Israel is in Tel Aviv, but we have a consulate in Jerusalem. I mean, literally, you could just move the people in the consulate to the embassy and the embassy to the consulate, change the names. I mean, you could tomorrow take down the name that says consulate in Jerusalem and put up the word embassy. Now, granted, you probably would have a little more security. You might need a little bit more. You might need the ambassador to actually live in Jerusalem rather than in Tel Aviv. But the bottom line is, I don't think it's all that difficult. So if somebody knows something that I don't, I would certainly love to hear about that. And if you think about this from a Jewish point of view, the most significant date for Jewish individuals, of course, is 1947, or really 1948, and with the idea of the establishment of the nation of Israel. But certainly the second most important date, and in some respects even more significant, is 1967, and that after the Six-Day War is the first time that Israel has occupied East Jerusalem, and since then basically all of Jerusalem in one way or another has been under Israeli authority. If you want to talk about this biblically, you can talk about individuals that have been talking about Jerusalem as the capital of Israel since look at all the Psalms, for example, and all the other aspects of that. So that, I think, is one of those issues which may be controversial over the next couple of days. And certainly I wanted to talk about that. And by the way, if you'd like to join our conversation, as we're only going to spend a few minutes talking about Jerusalem as the next capital of Israel, at least from the American point of view, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to Michigan first. And Keith, what would you say about the moving of our embassy to Jerusalem? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, it's about time. In my opinion, it's something that is very important for the United States to be able to back up the Israeli government and be able to have our understanding that we are going to, like I said, is to back them up and to support their efforts to be able to be an independent nation. It's something that is, and as you stated beforehand, it's something that has been going on for thousands of years, and they already have a position of saying that this is our land. This is something that has been given to us. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who tend to ignore what God states.
Well, again, I think you can make a case, certainly biblically, for this. I think you can make a case politically, because a lot of times people say, well, then you're showing preference to Israel. Well, yeah, I think so, because even apart from all my biblical convictions about that, it is the only democracy that we have in that region of the world, the only place where individuals, even if they're not Jewish, have rights. Just think of the rights that Arab citizens have in Israel, unlike the rights that, say, Jewish citizens or Jewish individuals would have in other Arab countries. So if nothing else, it makes a great deal of sense. By the way, if you have a comment or two before we move on to another topic, what about moving the embassy to Jerusalem? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, over the years, I've written about how people in high-tax states have been migrating to low-tax states. Unfortunately, many politicians in those states want to argue that tax rates don't affect investment or even migration. But the latest data from the IRS demonstrates that, once again, we have tax migration. Between 2012 and 2015, a net of $8.5 billion in adjusted gross income left New Jersey and $6.2 billion left Connecticut. Illinois, for example, lost $13.6 billion. However, during that same period, Florida, with no state income tax, gained $39.3 billion in adjusted gross income. You can even see tax migration between high-tax states. As an editorial in the Wall Street Journal puts it, income flows down the tax gradient. New York lost a net of $850 million in adjusted gross income to New Jersey and Connecticut, but at the same time, New Jersey gave up $335 million to Pennsylvania. Now, it might be tempting for politicians wanting to raise taxes to write all of this tax migration off to merely an example of snowbird flight. After all, people have been moving from the Northeast to Florida for decades. But the examples I just cited show that it is more than just a migration to warmer climate. It is a migration to low-tax states. The tax migration, especially of the affluent, have had a negative effect on state budgets. Revenues have fallen short in states like New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut. That has resulted in budget deficits that have forced legislatures to cut public services and even funds to local government. The local governments have responded by raising property taxes, thus increasing more tax migration. All of these facts and figures are a reminder that people vote with their feet when you tax their pocketbooks. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm John Stonestreet, president of the Colson Center for Christian Worldview and co-host of the Daily Breakpoint Commentaries. To Kerby Anderson and the entire Point of View radio team, I want to say congratulations for 45 years of defending faith, family, and freedom.
Well, again, that is one of the reasons we're doing these broadcasts over the last couple of days, just to talk about 45 years. Just a minute, one of the things I wanted to do is play an interview that Marlon Maddox did with Oliver North, since we're talking about some of these foreign policy issues. But let me finish my point, and that is, again, this idea of moving our embassy to Jerusalem is seen as so controversial, and maybe it's important for just a minute before we finish this to talk about the history, because when the United Nations drew up its partition plan in 1947, it kind of envisioned Israel as a place that would be divided up and Jerusalem as a city that would be, in a sense, an international city. But the war that followed actually then resulted in finally a border which was oftentimes referred to as a green line because it was drawn in green ink. So Israel was in control of the western half. Jordan was in control of the eastern half, which included kind of the old city. So that's kind of where we found ourselves at that particular point in time. And so then, as I pointed out, after the 1967 Six-Day War, Israel occupied the East Jerusalem section, and that sort of gave us what we have here today. So if nothing else, that's one of the reasons why I don't think this is such a controversial issue, but certainly one of those things that we will be talking about in the future. And so if nothing else, one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up is because you'll be hearing about it in the news. And most importantly, I think it's also maybe is a good way to just finally end this sort of hope on the part of the Arabs that they will be able to have Jerusalem as their capital. Just before we get into some other issues, I thought just because it is our 45th anniversary, we might play this interview that we did, Marlon Maddox did with Oliver North. This goes back to 2002. But all through the week, we've played some of the interviews, Margaret Thatcher, Dan Rather, a couple of others, George W. Bush, Stephen Forbes. But since we're talking foreign policy for a minute, let's hear what Marlon Maddox and Oliver North had to say.
Ollie North is with us. When we have talked about you on this program in the past, a lot of guys, a lot of people supporting you, but they have some problems. They say Ollie North broke the law. After all, there is a Boland Amendment which says you were not supposed to support the Contras in Nicaragua. You went ahead and did it, so you broke the law.
Well, Marlon, first of all, that's not what the Boland Amendment said. The various Boland Amendments, and I listed them in the book so that the reader could see them, maybe for the first time. Mm-hmm. Even those people who choose to believe that they said things other than they did, the most stringent of the Boland Amendments simply said you couldn't use any tax dollars to support the Nicaraguan resistance. So the president decided he wouldn't. He would abide by the Boland restrictions and find other ways of supporting the resistance. And in 1984, when the Congress cut off the help for the army that they had raised and trained and equipped and fielded and sent into battle, and then cut them off at the knees, just like in Vietnam, the president said, that's wrong, and we're going to find another way of doing it. So he turned to Saudi Arabia. He had us go to the government in Taiwan. He had us go to the government in Brunei. He had us go to private American citizens, and ultimately to have me use the profits of sale of arms to the Ayatollah, all of that to support the Nicaraguan resistance.
And you say that's legal?
Of course it is.
But this is the media hype, Ollie, as you well know. Here's a guy that is a lawbreaker. The Boland Amendment said stop sending arms and support, but Ollie North just kept doing it. You know what the media says, but you were never charged legally with breaking the Boland Amendment.
But see, I was charged in the media, Marlon.
That's what I'm talking about. Legally, but you never were.
No,
trial in the press.
Tried by the press, but never by the prosecutor. Yeah.
Well, again, just wanted you to hear a little bit of interview with Oliver North, and that goes back many years. But I just thought as we go through these last couple of days, every once in a while we play another interview that we did, either that I did yesterday. Penna was here. We played one that she did. But let's get back into some other really important issues. And now we bring to the microphone Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, an individual that, of course, has served with distinction both in the military and in government, and has been an individual that in the past was the Executive Director of the National Center for Policy Analysis, brought him to Dallas, and brought you in studio today. You know, last time you and I were together, we were at the Museum of the Bible, isn't that something?
We were at the Museum of the Bible, and what an incredible, museum, what an incredible collection of the history of the book that has really changed the world.
I might just mention that we have links to your website, and I know you have some comments about this. We have posted 2 articles on our website and also links to yours. Mueller's Credibility Problem, that one comes from the Wall Street Journal, and then one by David French, The Incredible Tale of a Reckless Partisan FBI Agent and Our Partisan Bureaucracy. We're talking about a man by the name of Sturzock. I've never heard too much about Peter Sturzock until the other day. We found out why Mueller fired him, because he was sending all these anti-Trump texts to his mistress, and I can go into all the details, but I believe you think it is time for Mr. Mueller to stop doing all the things he's doing. What's your thoughts?
Well, I would even go as far as to saying I think that it's time for this incredible taxpayer-funded fiasco to end. Yeah. When you think about what has really been revealed. And the credibility has been lost by Mr. Mueller. When you look at this Sturzock gentleman who had interviewed, General Flynn, and all of a sudden we come up with these charges against General Flynn, but yet he had also interviewed Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin from the Clinton campaign, but yet nothing was brought forth on them. And then now we find out that Mr. Sturzock was also the same guy who changed the language in Mr. Comey's, press statement about Hillary Clinton and her emails. It went from gross negligence to, careless or something like that, which gross negligence is criminal. It is. So why do we have a person like this, also knowing his background with the text messages or whatever he sent? It just really undermines Mr. Mueller, and it really also undermines what people are starting to believe about the Federal Bureau of Investigation, because his former position was an assistant to the Director for Counterintelligence. But you go even further, Kirby. Remember Andrew McCabe, who was number 2 at the FBI. How is it that his wife, running for a state Senate race,
in Virginia,
gets a $500,000 contribution from the governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe? Now, I can understand he wants her to win this race, but $500,000 from one person, the governor.
For a state Senate race. So we're not talking about even a congressional race. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing was, Mr. McCabe never declared that. And this was during a time when the FBI was supposedly investigating, Mrs. Clinton. And so everything just really boils down to Mr. Mueller is, evidencing the thing that we most suspect is that the corruption and the cronyism in Washington, D.C. is deep and is rampant, and now it seems to have invaded not the everyday field agent level of the FBI, but the headquarters level of the FBI.
Let me just quote from David French. He was sitting in that chair just a few days ago. He's with National Review. And he also pointed out, first of all, I love how he says, if this story hadn't been verified by virtually every mainstream media outlet, you'd think it came from the conspiratorial fever dreams of the alt-right. But it turns out this guy was, as we talked about, Peter Strzok, was up to his eyebrows in all sorts of anti-Trump comments. But then on the second page, he talks about Lois Lerner in the IRS. I'd like to get your thoughts as a member of Congress in the past and having looked at the FBI and the CIA and the IRS and some of these groups. Some people are starting to feel like some of that has been weaponized from the previous administration. What are your
without
thoughts?
a doubt, the IRS has been weaponized. When you have an organization, a movement, a constitutional conservative grassroots movement that caused President Obama to lose the most, seats in the House of Representatives post World War II, then all of a sudden he turned the most powerful agency in the United States government, the IRS, against him. And now we know that that was true. But yeah, no one has been held accountable. No one has been held responsible. Lois Lerner still does not say anything about it. And now we know that she doesn't want her testimony to be made public.
Isn't that interesting?
Because she is in fear for her life. Well, what is it about your testimony, ma'am, that will cause you to be scared? And furthermore, why are we paying her a six-figure taxpayer-funded pension?
Yeah, those are all good questions. And also the question as well, the only reason we know about Peter Strzok is because I think finally Mr. Mueller, Robert Mueller, figured, we can't stonewall any longer.
No.
And you've been a member of Congress. When you request information from the bureaucuracy and they take 6, 10, 12 months,
you got them.
There's something going.
That's a shark smelling blood.
We're going to take a break, and we are privileged to have in studio with us Alan West. He'll be with us this first hour, and we will be joined by some others a little bit later in the program. But if you'd like to join us, I see one of you wants to talk about the moving of the capital to Jerusalem, so I'd love to get your comments. I suspect Alan West has a few comments about that as well. And if you want to make some comments about whether or not this investigation, I put it with quotes around it, by Robert Mueller and all of that needs to end, we'd love to get your comments. And let me just mention, we've got a number of articles today. The first one is on the Supreme Court issue, and that is an article by Alan West. We want to get his comments before we're done about what happened yesterday before the Supreme Court. Then 2 on the partisan bureaucracy, and we haven't even gotten to Cal Thomas's piece about starving the bureaucracy. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
With the way things are going right now, there's got to be a source of truth somewhere.
Eric lives in California, and he's listened to Point of View since he was a child hanging around his dad's auto shop in Nevada. He says it's his only trustworthy source of information about what's happening in the world.
Well, I feel bad because I have not been donating, and I'll tell you what, I'm getting back to that because just recently I realized with all the junk going on with all the media, with all these news things, the only one that I count on is you guys, and what would I do if you guys weren't there? I don't know what I'd do. Where would I get my news? And I would be dead in water. So I got to do my part.
Make sure you do your part, like Eric. Join the Truth Team. Get all the details by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team. Support the truth and make a difference for the future. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
In studio with us today, Colonel Alan West. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention we have some links to alanbwest.com. First article here on the Supreme Court case, which we'll get to in just a minute. But we're also talking about some of the revelations coming down about Peter Strzok and also, of course, Robert Mueller, and two pieces that we've posted there. Mueller's credibility problem, which I think is a very good summary by the Wall Street Journal. One from the National Review by David French, who was in studio with us just the other day. The incredible tale of a reckless partisan FBI agent and our partisan bureaucracy. And he goes on to not only talk about the FBI, but the IRS. So lots to cover. Let's, if we can, come back to a topic I raised before everybody joined us here, and that is the issue of whether or not to move the embassy to Jerusalem. So we'll go to Missouri, KNEO. Michael, what would you say about that?
Again, it's about time. Earlier you commented that one of the arguments against it was that we might be showing favoritism to Israel. And my point of view on that is, yes. Yeah, good. We should.
Yeah, the only democracy we can find in that area of the world, so that's good.
Not only that, but I can't remember the last time an Israeli citizen came into a U.S. facility and shot up the people.
Not exactly. Good point. Colonel West, I'm sure you've got some comments, and since we were talking about before you joined us, I'd love to hear them.
Well, it's interesting that this was law. This was passed in 1995.
That's right.
And so why is it that we have had, several different levels of presidents that, did not follow through and signed this and kept waiving it, every 6 or so months? Everyone keeps saying that the big concern is that, it will incite violence. Well, how are you ever going to get to a peace process if, people don't want you to recognize the legitimate capital of a nation? Every other country that the United States of America has diplomatic relations with, our embassy is in their capital. We can have this, discussion about history, but it's revisionist history. I know that UNESCO wants to try to say that there are no monuments, there are no artifacts, there's nothing that leads back to the patriarchs or anything like that. But Jerusalem has been around since 5000 BC, and I think David built the temple there, at 3500 BC. So what is the discussion that we're having? And if this is something that incites, Hamas, which is a terrorist group, so why should we care that we're inciting Hamas? If Mahmoud Abbas is incited about this, let's be very honest. Mahmoud Abbas was a lieutenant of Yasser Arafat, and Fatah is just another terrorist organization. I know everyone keeps talking about a two-state solution. Which two states? Palestine is a region. It is not a people. And if you really want to understand your history, the whole, nexus behind that word being introduced was because of Roman Emperor Hadrian, after the Simon Bar Kokhba revolt, changed the name of the region from Judea to Syrian Palestina because he wanted to punish the Jews for revolting against the Empire of Rome. So the whole reason why we say Palestine is because of the Jewish people. Yeah. So that's history. That's true.
Well, I think so. And we did talk a little bit about that earlier in terms of in 1967, the attempt was to have it as an international city. But, of course, then after the war, you had the Israelis basically controlling one part of the city and the Jordan were controlling the rest. And really, in some respects, 1967 Six-Day War was more important because that's when Israel was able to control all of Jerusalem. And so, like you said, every other city is part, our capital, I should say, is part of where we have our embassy, except that one individual.
And the Jordanians were restricting the ability to visit the holy sites of Judaism and Christianity. And that has not been the case since Israel has been in control.
Look at the freedom Arabs have in Israel.
Incredible freedom.
Compared to that.
And what a great thing that happened in the year 2017, because it was 1917 with the Balfour Declaration that said we will establish a homeland for the Jewish people. It was 1967, the unification of Jerusalem. And now, finally, the United States of America is going to do the right thing.
Yeah, so 50 years and 100 years. I think I got my next commentary, so thank you for that one. Let's, if we can, just before we run out of time, talk about the first article by Alan B. West, and that is this important Supreme Court case. Now, I've written about it. You've written about it as well. But yesterday we had the oral arguments. Again, for people that are not familiar, Jack Phillips, Christian baker, Masterpiece Cakes Bakery in 2012. Two men come in and say they wanted a same-sex wedding cake. Now, interesting enough, most people don't realize this, and we talked about this with David French the other day. This case has been more mischaracterized than anything else. He lets homosexuals come in. He sells to anybody. He even offered to give them a cake. It was when they wanted certain messages on the cake, which I think even George Will in his column recently didn't seem to get the understanding on. But again, this is a case that will not just affect a baker in Colorado. It's going to affect Aaron and Melissa Klein in Oregon. It's going to affect Baronell Stutzman in Washington, florists, bakers, photographers, all sorts of individuals. So give us your perspective on that.
The perspective is very simple. Does the state have the right to declare, something a right to a certain group of people and then render irrelevant the constitutional right of an entire other group of people? Because if we're saying that all of a sudden same-sex marriage is the law of the land, which I find real interesting because today they're voting on national reciprocity to basically say the Second Amendment can be the Second Amendment and you can have that right. If the state is saying this, then what happens to your very first amendment right, which is the freedom of religion, the free exercise thereof? What happens to your freedom of expression? So now all of a sudden, people can come in and say that what you believe in, what you embrace has nothing to do with me and my rights that the state has said that I actually have, and the state will persecute you for having that. And that is the reason why Thomas Jefferson wrote in that letter to the Danbury Baptist Convention, he didn't want a head of state to all of a sudden be the head of a church, because then you will have persecution of said people. So now all of a sudden we have the state, the government, the United States of America, saying that our ideological agenda is part of our religion and what we believe, being a climate change or same-sex marriage or whatever. And anything that is opposing to that is subservient to it. This is a monumental case.
I think so.
When you look at, the ramifications thereof.
A lot of people try to present it as a religious liberty case, and it certainly is, but it's a bigger one. It's a free speech case.
Absolutely.
It's because you've had individuals, we've talked about, let's take it out of cakes for just a minute, because one of the other cases I've been following is this T-shirt maker in Kentucky who so far has won at every level because he didn't want to make certain T-shirts. But here's a guy that also has turned down T-shirts that would say gays, God hates gays, and all sorts of stuff. And even when you talk about this with Jack Phillips, he's not been willing to do cakes for divorce celebrations, for bachelor parties, for Halloween. So we're really talking about the fact that in many cases you have even lesbian bakers and lesbian T-shirt makers and homosexual florists and others saying, we're not sure we want to go down this road, because after all, once you begin to limit the freedom of Jack Phillips as a Christian, I'm fearful it's going to come back and affect some of the rest of us.
You're absolutely right. So all of a sudden, some neo-Nazis or skinheads show up and say, I want you to create this product for me. Well, guess what? You're going to have to do it, or else what? They're going to say that you're violating my civil right. But, of course, this is all basic about, who determines what a right is based upon their ideological agenda. When Tim Tebow was taking a knee.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Everyone was outraged. How dare you?
First Amendment.
I can't, but First Amendment, what a violation. He doesn't have a freedom of expression on the NFL field. Colin Kaepernick does it. He's the Sports Illustrated Man of the Year. He's the GQ Man of the Year. And so what I am concerned about is that an ideological agenda is determined what is a right in the United States of America.
Yeah, and that's really dangerous. And so, again, when the government can say you have to actually believe this and you have to promote this, that is a dangerous precedent.
And
so
remember, it wasn't too long ago that you had the mayor of Houston, Annalise Parker, that subpoenaed sermons from pastors.
That's amazing. Let me give you a chance, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about a First Amendment case, but maybe when we come back, can we talk about that Second Amendment case? Because you just posted something here about this vote on reciprocity. I don't think people understand exactly what that's all about. And since we are so privileged to have Colonel Allen West in studio just a little bit longer, let me just again encourage you, if you'd like to join the conversation. He will not be with us in the second hour, but we'll have Nick Pitts and Brent Taylor with us. Give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Also, when we come back, I've got this piece by Cal Thomas, Starving the Beast, in which some are saying, well, we might actually, in order to balance the budget, have to cut back on government. So maybe we'll see if a former member of Congress thinks there's any waste, fraud, or abuse actually in the United States government.
Oh, no, everything's fine.
And then we even have the possibility of a government shutdown that could happen on Saturday because Democrats are not going to move on this issue of immigration. So You know, we always just have a lot to talk about.
We do.
This is just amazing.
And that's a losing issue for the left right now.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, I see in the distance there, Dr. Nick Pitts is going to be with us, so we'll get him in here as well. I'm sure he's got a comment or two, and of course we'll have our Millennial Roundtable. Let me just mention that we've got a number of articles for you to read today, and those range from some that were written by Alan West, some by David French, some by the Wall Street Journal, and Cal Thomas, to mention just a few. And if you click on the picture of him, it'll take you to alanbwest.com. And again, he's got some things talking about voting on a gun rights bill. So we'll talk about Second Amendment issues. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It was Friday night and the lights in Texas shone down on the field. The Coons High School football team was about to smash through a banner and onto the field. Holding the banner were the Coons High School cheerleaders. Negative slogans like "Beat the Bulldogs" were a thing of the past. These cheerleaders wanted to be positive, so they looked to the Bible for a positive message they could communicate instead. But the school said the new banner message had to go. They had received a complaint and could not afford to take any chances. But the cheerleaders were not about to give up. First Liberty Institute stepped in and for the next 5 years represented the young women. The school argued that since the banner was on school property, the message, chosen entirely by the students and displayed on paper the students purchased and painted, was government speech, and that couldn't be religious without violating the Constitution. The court disagreed. No reasonable person would conclude that the message, scrawled in student script and held aloft by students, could be an official message of the state. Instead, the students' message was private speech, entitled to the protections of the First Amendment. Matthews v. Coons Independent School District stands for the important principle that schools cannot censor, ban, or claim ownership to the private religious speech of its students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, this is June Hunt from Hope for the Heart. Congratulations to my friend Kerby Anderson and to Point of View for 45 years of broadcasting.
Again, some of the things we've been talking about this week, 45 years of broadcasting since 1972 when Marlon Maddox started it. We had just a few minutes ago a chance to hear the interview that he did with Oliver North back in 2002. And we've been talking about in studio with, of course, Colonel Alan West and now J. Nicholas Pitts has joined us by phone.
You know,
in studio.
I had to go ahead and just embody the millennial being late to everything, but committing. You know, I just had to embody that. So I'm so glad to be here with you all.
Yeah, I was going to just have to do you by phone, and now he is in studio, so that's where we are at the moment. We were talking about, Nick, the whole issue of Jack Phillips and the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. So let's go to Maine for just a minute. WSEW. Bob, thank you for joining us today. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Hi, thank you. It's my understanding that some adherents to Moss, even in this country, are threatened with death and their families intimidated if they threaten or choose to leave the faith. But if someone who's a Christian refuses someone a cake, it's taken to the Supreme Court. That seems like very iniquitous and political correctness run amok.
That's something I hadn't even thought about there. Any comments?
No, you're right. I mean, when you have this belief, it's called apostasy. And I remember something that was very trying for us when we were in Afghanistan. There was an Afghan man that had left Afghanistan. He had converted to Christianity. He came back as a Christian aid worker. And, of course, he saw his family, and his family turned him in, and they were going to kill him, you know, for being an apostate. And so we were sitting there in Afghanistan and thinking to ourselves, what are we here fighting for? You know, if here we have people that, here's a man that should have the freedom to be able to say, this is what I want to believe in, and he's coming back to try to help his own people, but yet because he left their faith, their belief, they believe that he should die. So he ended up, I think Italy ended up coming in and taking him, and he got asylum there. So, yes, that's where we see the inconsistencies with Sharia law and some of the beliefs that you would have in a Western democratic society that believes in individual rights and freedoms and individual sovereignty.
One of the booklets that we make available to our donors, one last month was on Sharia law. This one's on the politicized culture. But again, we just recognize that if you want to take Sharia law ideas in other countries and bring them here, again, if nothing else, you can argue against Sharia law for a couple of reasons. 1, 8, and 14. One, because, first of all, Sharia law would be the preeminent law of the land, and that would violate the First Amendment. The Eighth Amendment is cruel and unusual punishment. Wouldn't you agree that would fit into that category?
Yes.
And then the 14th Amendment, of course, says the idea of equal protection or equal standing before the law. So if you want to ever argue against Sharia law, or why can't we allow Sharia law even for Muslims, 1, 8, and 14 are the ways to remember the answers.
And there was an interesting case that just came out in Garden City Community College, I think out in western Kansas, where there was a young Muslim basketball player that during the playing of the national anthem, you know, he was out there shooting baskets. And, of course, the people in the crowd, they just went apoplectic. Well, he ended up being put off the team. But the ACLU out of Kansas City came down and said because of his faith, he did not have to show reverence to the national anthem or to anything other than his God. Now, how is it then that Mr. Phillips, again, is there at the Supreme Court having to argue about not putting certain decorations on a cake for a specific ceremony he did not want to be a part of, but yet the ACLU of Kansas City says that someone does not have to respect or regard or revere the national anthem because of their faith?
Yeah, I think that's one of the troubling things that we continue to see, like you said, in the politicized culture, when individuals' main identity is their political ideology. And then just recent research that was coming out of Pew, and that many people don't even know what their political ideology is, and they don't know the traditional, like the undergirth of what those things stand for, which is just increasingly troubling when you think about it, because we hear Thomas Jefferson at the very forefront say that it's necessary for us to have an educated populace. And when we're not educated, and when we're continuing to make some of these analogies and comparisons and not following our logic all the way through, well, we know how that ends up, right? We know from the biblical narrative what it says in Proverbs 12:22. There's a way that seems right to man illogically, but it ends in destruction.
Yes. Just before I let you go, because I know Colonel Alan West has some other places to go, you mentioned something about Second Amendment. We've been talking about First Amendment, and as people go to alanbwest.com, there's a vote on what was called reciprocity. Can you explain that to everybody?
National reciprocity. And let me first, caveat this by saying I am a member of the board of directors for the National Rifle Association. I'm a life member and everything. But the Founding Fathers understood that if you were going to keep your First Amendment rights, they put the Second Amendment there. And I always remember why the British British landed and they went inland to Concord, Massachusetts. They wanted to destroy an armament factory and munitions factory. So our Second Amendment right has really been a part of us, and ensures that we're citizens and not subjects. But what is happening today is that Representative Hudson out of North Carolina has finally got it voted out of the Judiciary Committee. It's been 2.5 years. That now, if you are a legal, law-abiding concealed carry holder in Texas, you should be able to travel anywhere in the United States of America with that. I mean, that's national reciprocity. Now, some people, I've heard some people arguing, Chuck Schumer went to the Senate floor saying, why would he want to have someone from Texas show up in Times Square carrying a concealed weapon? Well, maybe you would have less terrorist attacks, if that were the case. But there is an incredible case that came down. Shaneen Allen. Shaneen Allen is a mother of two boys, a nurse, and she had a lawful, right to carry in Philadelphia where she was, but she went over in New Jersey. She got stopped at a traffic stop, and she told the officer that she has, a weapon in the car, and here's her concealed carry permit. She was arrested.
Yeah.
And here was a mother that had previously been, the victim of a crime, that wanted to be able to protect herself and her kids. And the state of New Jersey was going to put her in prison, make her a felon, and take her children away. Thank God. This was an 18-month ordeal she went through. And finally, Chris Christie came in and pardoned her, so everything was okay. But this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. And John Lott and John Stossel, a lot of them have talked about that. In the Constitution, we have what's called the full faith and credit clause. Mm-hmm. I've met your wife, you've met my wife. Neither of us were married in the state of Texas, but we're still considered to be married here in the state of Texas.
Absolutely.
We were married in other states, but we're considered to be married here. So we apply it to all sorts of things, except to things like Second Amendment, right?
And isn't it amazing that in the Obergefell versus Hodges case, that the Supreme Court unconstitutionally decides that same-sex marriage is the law of the land? But yet the thing that has been there since we adopted our Constitution, the Second Amendment, is not considered the law of the land.
Yeah. So
amazing.
Well, again, if you want to know more about Alan West, alanbwest.com. We've got that there. Thank you for dropping by. I know
My
you've
pleasure.
been a busy boy today, and I'm glad to have Nick Pitts here. We're going to have Brent Taylor with us in just a minute, so we'll do our Millennial Roundtable. You ready for this?
Oh, I'm so ready. I'm so ready.
Okay.
There are a couple of things that are in the news that we can talk about.
I'm thinking so. And we didn't get a chance to have the former member of Congress talk about whether or not the bureaucracy could be scaled down or starving the beast. So maybe we'll get to that without him. And we've talked a little bit about Mr. Sturzock, so we'll get into some of those things as well. So let me just mention, too, that we've been celebrating the 45th anniversary of Point of View. So, again, if we can slip in one or two of the other interviews, we'll certainly do that in the second hour as well. So visit our website, pointofview.net. If you didn't have a chance to hear some of the other broadcasts today, certainly Nick Pitts and Penna Dexter have done a very good job of covering some of that. So it's all available at the website, pointofview.net. My commentary today is on escaping taxes, and that's relevant in light of the tax reform issue and the fact that certain states, taxes are really high, and other states, they're low. And guess what? People are leaving from high-tax states to low-tax states. They're even going down the tax gradient. And sometimes they'll be going from New York to New Jersey, from New Jersey to Pennsylvania. So it is interesting to see how that plays out. So that article is on the website today. We have some videos, and most importantly, if you could help us out financially on our 45th anniversary, we'd greatly appreciate it. Click on that button that says donate, and we would appreciate your financial support. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Nick Pitts and Dr. Brent Taylor right after this.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but Please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. The Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You know, on Wednesdays, we usually do a Millennial Roundtable, and we sort of mixed it up today. We had Colonel Alan West with us on the first hour for part of that conversation. Nick Pitts joining us for a little bit of that, but now we have our typical roundtable. Dr. Nick Pitts with us, as well as Dr. Brent Taylor. Of course, you know Nick, and I imagine most of you know Brent Taylor by now, but again, pastor of First Baptist Church in Carrollton, and just, again, two very educated individuals. As a matter of fact, Colonel Alan West said, I need to get out of here because we've got all the intellectual firepower here. So, again, thank you for joining us.
Brent, I know you've heard why they say that intellectual battles are so aggressive, I guess you could say, is because there's so little to lose with some of our battles. And so, nevertheless, we're going to fight until the very end. I hope you're ready.
I'm ready to engage in a battle of wits,
okay,
but you're fighting against an unarmed man, so just be aware of that.
Well, I think all of us are that way as well. We already have phone calls coming in. We'll get to those in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. We've talked about First Amendment, Second Amendment, as well as some of the concerns about the bureaucracy and much more. But let me come back to the case, since it is still fresh in our minds, and that is yesterday oral arguments on what I argue, and I think others are now arguing, is one of the most important cases before the High Court. Has to do with the Christian baker Jack Phillips. In 2012, two men came into Masterpiece Cakes Bakery and asked for a same-sex wedding cake. He refused. Now, one of the things that I thought was interesting is David French, who was sitting in that chair just a few days ago, said, he's never seen a case more mischaracterized in my entire legal career. Now, he's not quite as old as I am, but he's been around a long time, and that's quite an incredible statement, because even reading George Will's column, and I am a George Will fan, but George Will's column, I think, didn't get it because he doesn't understand that Jack Phillips offered even the cake and said, here, I'll give you the cake, I'll sell you the cake, here's what you can do, but they wanted a specific message on it. That's where he balked. And it isn't just he balked because they're homosexual. He balked for other reasons. He's never done a Halloween cake. He's never done a cake for bachelor parties. He's never done a cake for a celebration of divorce and a variety of other issues. The issue had to do with the message, not the food. And when people don't understand that, then eventually he gets compared to like Southern segregationists. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, again, I think the legal I think it's a pretty well established that everyone's really encouraged by the way yesterday went. Like the way that the court was argued, it was great. But time and time again, it just feels as though evangelicals, the messaging of it has just been there's been room for improvement right now. Because even just the common refrain right now, would Jesus bake the cake? Well, that's not the question that we're asking right now. Even though that sounds really good, that's not necessarily the question. The question is, should the state force an individual to make a cake? And again, would Jesus force someone to make a cake? Again, there's a messaging problem in that. But what we're seeing is that Jack Phillips is just an individual that has a gift from God and wants to utilize his gifts for the glory of God. And God's not going to bless what's not walking in obedience to him. And so Jack Phillips is just choosing, again, out of kindness and generosity, I can't bake your cake, but here I'm not going to not sell you a cake. It's not that. I'm not going to bake this particular type of cake. And then he was even above and beyond, was willing to go to various other people and say they can do a cake, they can do a cake. So it's just a frustrating thing.
It certainly is. And again, the question I might have for you, Brent, is you have members of your congregation that might just say, if this goes the wrong way, as a Christian who believes in traditional marriage, do I have to then say maybe I can't be in the wedding business? I can't be a photographer. I can't be a wedding planner. I can't be a florist, a baker, or something like that, because I will sooner or later be forced to do something that would violate my convictions?
This issue of religious liberty is such an important issue, such an important topic for believers because it impacts every area of our life. I think a lot of people think of religious liberty, they think about what's happening in the pulpit. You know, the reference was made in the earlier hour to the mayor in Houston,
right,
requiring these pastors, to send in sermons. And of course, many pastors said, well, you want sermons? We'll inundate you with sermons. And there were plenty that were sent. And I think there is a fear among Christians today that the values that we hold dear in this country are being attacked. They're being attacked from all sides, and they don't see equity in that. They don't see other sides having to answer in the same way. Here we find a man who's incredibly talented, a baker who's incredibly talented, who is also a man of strong convictions. And for some reason in our culture today, it seems like strong convictions have become a negative, because we see what's happening right now in Hollywood. We see what's happening in Washington, D.C. We see all the scandal that is taking place every time we literally turn on the Today Show. We're seeing these scandals that are taking place. And yet many people are condemning with outrage against what these people have done, and rightfully so. Yet at the same time, there is this idea that if you are a person of strong convictions and strong beliefs, well, you need to keep that to yourself. He is a man who was trying to accommodate. He wasn't hateful. He wasn't rude in the process. As you pointed out, Nick, he was trying to accommodate these people in the process, but it was made to be, it's been mischaracterized to be almost like a hate crime. That should cause Christians to pause. That should cause Christians concern, because they're going to start stepping out of the world. They're going to start stepping out of business, out of fear of what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, where does it end is what I would want to know. Like, so if you're going to force him to make a cake, then again, where does it end? Does it force an individual? Does it force a doctor to perform an abortion? Does it force? I just wonder what other industry will fall because of this.
Well, and churches are rapidly moving out of the wedding business.
Yes.
They are stepping away from the wedding business. Yeah. They are saying, I'm not going to do weddings because weddings are state-sanctioned events, so we are going to do covenant ceremonies where you can come to the church and be married in a covenant ceremony, but they're trying to protect themselves. It just shows the craziness that we've reached in our culture today.
Yeah. One of the things that we have been doing for those individuals that support us $45 a month is we have these little booklets. One was on Sharia law, and this one I want to come back to after our break, and this is on a biblical view on politicized culture. And you can probably see that half of it is what's a biblical principle of civility. Because back to the messaging issue that Nick mentioned a minute ago, first of all, in terms of what we say, that's not helpful. And sometimes in what we do. Sometimes Christians have been perceived as narrow-minded, with a white-knuckle grasp of their Bible, hateful kind of angry people. This is why I'm so glad we had Jack Phillips, or if this other case with Aaron and Melissa Klein went to the Supreme Court. These are really nice people. These are the kind of people that you'd want to go have coffee with. They're not mean-spirited. And Jack Phillips, he doesn't even necessarily look like your typical stereotypical Christian, right? So that kind of helped a little bit. But how do we interact with a culture that is not gracious towards us?
Yeah, I think it's going to be increasingly important, and we'll probably explore this in the next after the break. It's just the idea of what Jesus said in Matthew 10:16, to be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves. Not every hill is worth fighting on, so it's going to take a thoughtfulness and consideration to figure out what are those hills that are worth dying on, and what are those hills that I'm worth manifesting that faithful presence even more explicitly.
Well, again, we are privileged to have two individuals with academic credentials, one at the Dallas Baptist University, another one who's a pastor, and we'll get into those issues. Of course, we'll take some of the phone calls, too, by the way, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls and continue our conversation with Nick Pitts and Brent Taylor right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, over the years, I've written about how people in high-tax states have been migrating to low-tax states. Unfortunately, many politicians in those states want to argue that tax rates don't affect investment or even migration. But the latest data from the IRS demonstrates that once again we have tax migration. Between 2012 and 2015, a net of $8.5 billion in adjusted gross income left New Jersey and $6.2 billion left Connecticut. Illinois, for example, lost $13.6 billion. However, during that same period, Florida, with no state income tax, gained $39.3 billion in adjusted gross income. You can even see tax migration between high-tax states. As an editorial in the Wall Street Journal puts it, income flows down the tax gradient. New York lost a net of $850 million in adjusted gross income to New Jersey and Connecticut, but at the same time, New Jersey gave up $335 million to Pennsylvania. Now, it might be tempting for politicians wanting to raise taxes to write all of this tax migration off to merely an example of snowbird flight. After all, people have been moving from the Northeast to Florida for decades. But the examples I just cited show that it is more than just a migration to warmer climate. It is a migration to low-tax states. The tax migration, especially the affluent, have had a negative effect on state budgets. Revenues have fallen short in states like New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut. That has resulted in budget deficits that have forced legislatures to cut public services and even funds to local government. The local governments have responded by raising property taxes, thus increasing more tax migration. All of these facts and figures are a reminder that people vote with their feet when you tax their pocketbooks. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Noel Boucher with Pure Hope, and I've had the privilege of being on Point of View Radio multiple times over the years, and I just want to wish everyone at Point of View Radio, the whole team, a happy 45th anniversary.
Well, again, Nick Pitts is with us, but also Noel Boucher, and thank you again for all of you that have said your well wishes for 45 years of broadcasting. I still love what Gary Bauer said the other day. Gary Bauer has known us since the 1980s, at least, and maybe even before that. And he said, I had no idea you were around for 45 years. So very interesting. We've got calls here on everything from Jerusalem and whether or not that should be where the capital is and whether we should have an embassy, all the way to the issue of this issue of First Amendment rights. So we'll take some of those calls in just a minute. But again, we have Nick Pitts, Brent Taylor in studio. And I mentioned our latest booklet we make available to some of our donors. And in the civility section, civility is really based upon the golden rule, isn't it? You know, I want to treat other people as I would like to be treated. And it's certainly based upon biblical principles of things like in Proverbs 51:5, a gentle answer turns away wrath. I've been in some really hot debates and discussions on college campuses, and sometimes if I just maintain my demeanor and am gracious, eventually some of the hostility gets away. So are there some lessons we can learn in terms of how to be civil in the conflict that we deal with today?
Yeah, I completely agree and would highly commend the little booklet that Kerby has wrote. I think Jesus is just an exemplar for us to be able to look to. And one of the things that captivates me about Jesus is the quickness by which he asks questions. And what my grandma would say is the person who asks the questions in the conversation holds the power. And just to be able to, I think one of the key ways that we can take some of the vitriol as well as some of the heat out of conversations is just to ask questions and have those questions kind of get to the heart of where that emotion is stirring. And what we'll find out is their feelings are never wrong, but where those feelings come from often are. And that really does open an opportunity, because you can't reason with an unreasonable person. And oftentimes emotions are what lead people to be unreasonable. But if we can get to the heart of it, which is the reasonable part, the why part, I think that's where it's the opportunity for the Christian, or anyone for that matter.
So what are you saying, Nick? I'm just asking a question. Okay.
What I'm saying, Brent, is you need to get on board with the idea of pork barbecue is the best barbecue. And
all right. It's frozen. Let it go. All right. So when you talk about Jesus being the example, and I think that's exactly right. And there's three words that I think are critical when you talk about the civility issue, and that's grace, truth, and love.
Right.
And we have to operate as believers. We have to operate in all three ways. Jesus was always dealing in grace. He was always dealing in truth, and he was always dealing in love. And as believers, we should be very passionate about those things. I see a lot of Christians that are very passionate about their opinions on Facebook, or about their political parties that they have and that they support, and there's nothing wrong with being passionate about things, being supportive of things, but we have to remember our ultimate allegiance is to the Lord Jesus Christ, and we need to represent him. I saw something on Twitter the other day from Bob Goff, who was talking about how he wants people to see him, and every time they meet him, they think that they've been with Jesus.
Wow.
And not from a prideful kind of way, obviously, but just in the way he treats people. And I think that's a pretty good way for people to look at life. Am I representing Jesus? We used to talk about what would Jesus do. It almost became kind of humorous in the Christian community, but I think Jesus was always operating in grace, always operating in truth, always operating in love. And I think we even with the baker see that. I think we see him seeking to do that, seeking to be compassionate, but not abandoning truth. And that's what we have to do as Christians. We can stand for truth and still show grace and love.
I think it's even regardless of what the other person is, right? So I think it's really easy for us to do that with a person that's being gracious to us, with being truthful to us and being loving to us. But regardless of the disposition or the demeanor or the character, the temperament of the person on beside us, we have to still be gracious. The commands of God are not contingent upon the people that we're talking to. The commands of God are binding upon us, and it's a requisite for us as we live and move and manifest faithful presence in the world for us to demonstrate these qualities, because they will know us by our love. They won't know us by our mic drops.
Well, again, we've talked about grace, truth, and love. Let me add one more word. What about humility? It says, for example, in Philippians 2, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, let each of you regard one another as more important than himself. One of the things that education, since we're all sort of educated people around the table, is you sort of realize the more you know, the more you don't know. And the more you say, it's possible that somebody that I disagree with has a better idea than I do. And it seems to me that that's something we need to foster as well in the Christian community. Okay, tell me why you believe that. I'm not sure I would necessarily hold to that, but I'd love to hear, because it's possible that you're right and I'm wrong. And that's hard for Christians to say that sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it took Balaam a donkey to be able to tell him right from wrong. And so I think we need to demonstrate that humility. And I think one of the key components to humility is teachableness in these kind of demeanors, and the ability just to understand that there's more that's to be understood, right? That was Socrates that said, I'm the smartest man in the world because I recognize that I am the dumbest man in the world, kind of in the Pitts translation from the Greek. It's this understanding of always wanting to be teachable, this natural curiosity. And I think that's one of the beautiful characteristics that you even see of Jesus, this teachable, teach me what you're feeling right now. Teach me how you're thinking right now, with just some of the questions that he limited. Everything from the woman at the well to the rich young ruler. I mean, it's just beautiful to see Jesus on display.
And Kerby, I would be really careful about bringing up humility, because that is a learned virtue that we have to develop in our life. It's like contentment when Paul talks about that.
Yeah, learn to be content, yes.
And I think it's really dangerous when Christians start actually trying to apply what the Bible has to say and actually learning.
I've actually mastered humility, Brent. I don't know if you know this or not, but I've actually
really
got
about how humble he is.
I've got a book coming out, 7 Steps to Master Humility, and how I did it. And so be sure to buy that when it drops.
If anybody could do that, it would be you. So, but humility is one of those characteristics that I think as Christians, we like to be known as being a humble person. We just don't like doing it. It's like being a servant. Everybody wants to be called a servant. Nobody wants to be treated like one.
A servant. That's what I said.
And so we think that when we talk about humility, that issue that's not just a word that we talk about at church. It's how we're to live our lives. And so even in conversations as believers that we're having with people about all of these topics, I mean, we're not lacking in topics to talk about today. All of these topics have to come from a point of view where we do stand for truth and we do stand for what is right, but we also are gracious in how we're learning and listening and hearing, because sometimes the way you reach people is not by telling them things. It's by listening to where they are and allowing them to speak in order that you might be able to more effectively speak into their lives.
And again, the importance of asking questions. We've talked about that so often. Let's take at least one phone call before we get to the next break. In Texas, Rachel, I think you wanted to speak about Jack Phillips, so you have the floor. Rachel, you there? Let's see, we got Rachel.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm confused because I just wonder, why are people looking at this cake making issue as a racial or hate kind of crime, when to me it's just a moral issue. He's doing it because he loves God, but, racial, of course, discrimination is hateful. He's doing one out of love, the choice he made for God, and not because he hates the people.
And I would say maybe welcome to the 21st century, where just expressing your moral concerns is a hate crime, right?
It is, and I saw today in Jim Dennison's article, he addresses that by talking about you, Kerby, by talking about your book. And
I didn't even pay him to do it either. That's amazing.
Isn't that nice how that works? But your book led a biblical point of view on homosexuality and the difference in understanding the difference between racial issues and homosexual issues. I think that is something that Christians have to really understand and begin to develop the ability to discuss, because that is going to be increasing in how our culture begins to define moral issues. It's going to become more not just issues of morality, but rights.
Yeah, I think that if we're looking at it from a messaging perspective, so I'm pulling out my undergrad at Austin Peay State University where we chanted "Let's Go Peay." So if I'm thinking about it from an purely messaging standpoint, I'm thinking the most significant difference that you can communicate and articulate, the difference between the idea of a racial thing, this is our civil rights, is you cannot choose to be an African American. That's just, you're born an African American, whereas you choose to act on your homosexuality. And I think that's the key significant difference that you can walk away with an individual, just to make that difference that you have, to say that that's not a valid argument, because there's a choice to be made with homosexuality. There is not a choice for African American.
Very good. Let's take a break. We have some more phone calls here, but also when we come back, since it's our 45th anniversary, I thought I'd also play an interview that we did with Lou Dobbs a while back. I thought you might like to hear that one, and maybe even Greg Laurie, if we can fit that in. So all sorts of individuals that we've had a chance over the years to interview, and it is a privilege to have in studio today Nick Pitts and Brent Taylor, and earlier Colonel Alan West. A lot of fun to do this program every day. We'll continue the conversation, take some more phone calls right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Nick Pitts and Brent Taylor in studio with us. One of the articles, actually two of the articles we posted, one, Mueller's credibility problem. This has to do with the fact that Robert Mueller actually let go an individual by the name of Peter Strzok, and we now find out that he was sending all sorts of texts to his mistress that were anti-Trump, and we, of course, talked a little bit about that with Colonel Alan West in the first hour. But then in addition to that, you have David French's piece, An Incredible Tale of a Reckless Partisan FBI Agent in Our Partisan Bureaucracy. And guys, I just love how he starts this. If this story hadn't been verified by virtually every mainstream media outlet in the country, you'd think it came straight from conspiratorial fever dreams of the alt-right, but nevertheless it is. And so he talks some time about Peter Strzok. Then he talks about going to the IRS, moving from the FBI to the IRS to people like Lois Lerner. And since we do a millennial roundtable, I've got to think that, again, if I'm a millennial looking at some of these things, I'm going to say, have we turned into a situation in which every part of the federal bureaucracy has become partisan?
And unfortunately, this is just the latest kindling to put onto the fire of trust issues that millennials have with institutions that not just are government related, but are just that dot the societal landscape right now. Millennials largely don't trust the church because of the Catholic Church scandal and all the abuses that they had 10, 15, 20 years ago. Then they don't trust the business community because you've got the Enrons of the world and you've got all these other corporations that demonstrated greed, and they feel as though there's disloyalty towards that. And now we've got the government. And if the Me Too movement and everything that's been happening with that about individuals that were within power and abuse that power to hurt other people, again, we're just continuing to see the erosion of trust in these institutions. And from a millennial standpoint, all that does is create a skepticism within us as to who can I trust. And increasingly what the numbers look like is no one.
And it looks like some were just going to say, I'm not going to register to vote.
I'm not going to register to vote because our voter numbers are at all-time lows right now. We're 20 points behind the next generation when it comes to registration to vote. We're not sticking with jobs. One, partly because of innovation that's happening, but two, because research has indicated that we're not feeling loyalty towards our companies. Again, it's just increasingly what we're seeing is that we're these wandering nomads that's going to be important because we're the largest age. Again, we're the largest age demographic. You can talk about us all you want, but we're this big, massive conglomerate that's a part of this great American experiment, and it's going to be important for us to get together, get our head in the game. Come on, Gen X, tell us something.
Well, it sounds like to me that y'all want a trophy for being the largest generation out there.
Well, that's the only way I'm going to get a trophy, so I'll say yes, give me the trophy.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, though, because what I'm seeing is not just among the millennial generation, you have this breakdown in trust, but now because of all of these things that you've listed, I don't think it's limited just to that group. I think there's a huge breakdown in trust across the board. And
yes, I think so.
I think the president is using this to his advantage. As he said, I made campaign promises, and I'm going to fulfill those promises. We saw that today with what happened with Jerusalem and the capital of Israel. Another campaign promise that he made that he is saying now I'm fulfilling. And so I think that there is in our culture today many people who are trying to figure out where can I find truth, who can I trust, because there is this low threshold of integrity in our culture today. And I think people are feeling like there's no one out there that I can trust, which again, and I say this every time I'm on the air, but I just think it presents a great opportunity for Christians. I'm not sure how great an opportunity it is for the church at large, because you do have this breakdown as we talk about
the
institutional side.
Christians.
Yes, as individuals, be the church, be Jesus in your community, and show what it means to have integrity, show what it means to be the real thing, and let people see that in your life, and that will be attractive against a backdrop of broken integrity and darkness that's in our world today.
I think it's increasingly important, like what we talked about earlier, especially for Christians to manifest that faithful presence, to be that light, to be that fragrant aroma, one, in their neighborhood, because as I feel like it's my soapbox right now, the reality that 51% of Americans don't know their neighbors' names. We just are largely isolated individuals that don't have friends, that have a lot of Facebook friends, and occasionally poke people every now and then on Facebook. So you have, one, the isolated individuals, the lonely individuals, and then two, to manifest that faithful presence in their churches, in their vocational places, on the road, in traffic, in the grocery stores, all of these places that are beautiful opportunities to be that distinctively different person. And I think it's going to be increasingly more important.
You know, I wanted to play this interview we did with Lou Dobbs, because sometimes that's a whole issue about trusting in government and who do you go to find information. Of course, various individuals you look to, various individuals and websites you look to, hopefully radio programs and the rest. But here's the interview we did a while back with Lou Dobbs. One of the themes that run through many of your books, including The War on the Middle Class and certainly Upheaval, is this idea that there's really no one speaking for the middle class. And I mentioned this article in the New York Times. The American middle class is no longer the world's richest. Now, that's because Canada's kind of passed us a little bit, but there's a bigger issue, and that is, I would say, Lou, that as I were open up the phone, especially in the second hour, we'll probably take a lot of calls based after you go on the book. There are going to be all sorts of people saying, you know, I don't feel like big business represents me. I don't feel like labor unions represent me. I don't feel like the media is telling the truth. There is a real sense of frustration and alienation, and it seems to me that a candidate that can tap into some of that and say, no, I am for you. And I think Barack Obama did a little even of that, as you mentioned in the book in 2012. Those individuals are going to be more successful because the middle class feels like that nobody really is talking to them or speaking out for them.
Stan Greenberg and James Carville yesterday quoted as urging the Democratic Party to use the 1% strategy that they claimed was so successful for Barack Obama. Well, that's utter nonsense. That was the Occupy Wall Street crowd that used that strategy. The strategy he used, he talked over and over again about appealing to the middle class, about working men and women in this country. And he did so to great effect. He is not, as many people suggest, a terrific orator. He is far from it. He has a monotone. He is tedious to listen to. But when he talks to the American people in a campaign and focuses on each segment of the electorate, as he is wont to do, he's highly effective. And he appealed directly to the middle class. I said in 2012, whichever party appeals best to the middle class of this country wins this election. He took me at my word and went after them.
That's right.
I should not have said it out loud.
Well, again, Lou Dobbs, and talking about something that actually we were discussing about 3 years ago, but I think it illustrates, again, some of the conversation we've had around the table here. Whether you're in the middle class, whether you're a millennial, whether you're a Gen Xer, whether you're a baby boomer, I mean, they're just people looking for a place where they can find some truth.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I'm so grateful for Point of View is that it's having those conversations, and it's very encouraging to know that there's civil conversations by which avenues by which we can have those. But one of the discouraging things is we're still having those conversations. We're still struggling with some of these conversations. Imagine what I feel like as an old guy around the table here. You know, these are conversations we were having years ago, and we're still having them. And so, again, this distrust, and again, Washington specifically, we'll just point out Washington. There's a multitude of other examples that we can go to. We can go to Wall Street. We can go all the way to California and what's happening in Hollywood. But what we're continuing to see, specifically in Washington right now, is they're giving us every reason not to trust them right now. We vested them with power because their power comes from we the people. And what have they done with that power? Well, they've done with that power, and they've abused individuals, specifically out of the Me Too movement. And it's not just limited to a political party. Both political parties are at fault right now for this. And what we continue to see is just these men that have been preying upon and these women, and to the extent that we even have a congressional fund set up to be able to do that. We, the taxpayer dollars, the hard-earned money, is now going to pay for their discrepancies and the sheer audacity that they have. They can't keep their hands to themselves, but they want to keep their money and the secrecy to it. It's just preposterous to me. $25 million has been put out of this fund, and over 200 claims have been put on this fund. It is preposterous that the taxpayers are paying for the indiscretions of congressional employees because they can't keep their hands to themselves.
myfaithvotes.org. That's an article you just posted. We'll try to make that available to everybody, and we'll come back and talk about that. But, Brent, do you have the latest on the number of women and men in the Senate that have come out against Al Franken today?
Yes. Just as a few minutes ago, there were 30 who have come out, 29 Senate Democrats, including 13 women, and now 30 with the addition of Cory Booker, according to CNN. That's what CNN is reporting right now. So calling for his resignation.
John Conyers is gone, and I suspect, can we say with some predictability now that Al Franken is gone?
Al Franken, out of his office, they've said that he is set to have an announcement tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so one would hope that that announcement would be, because, as George Washington said, morality is a pillar upon which democracy is, that this immoral man, broken man, would go see restoration outside of Congress.
Yes. Well, I want to talk about that fund for sexual harassment. We just learned about it about a week ago, and Nick Pitts has done the research, so we'll learn from him right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It was Friday night and the lights in Texas shone down on the field. The Coons High School football team was about to smash through a banner and onto the field. Holding the banner were the Coons High School cheerleaders. Negative slogans like "Beat the Bulldogs" were a thing of the past. These cheerleaders wanted to be positive, so they looked to the Bible for a positive message they could communicate instead. But the school said the new banner message had to go. They had received a complaint and could not afford to take any chances. But the cheerleaders were not about to give up. First Liberty Institute stepped in and for the next 5 years represented the young women. The school argued that since the banner was on school property, the message, chosen entirely by the students and displayed on paper the students purchased and painted, was government speech, and that couldn't be religious without violating the Constitution. The court disagreed. No reasonable person would conclude that the message, scrawled in student script and held aloft by students, could be an official message of the state. Instead, the student's message was private speech, entitled to the protections of the First Amendment. Matthews v. Coons Independent School District stands for the important principle that schools cannot censor, ban, or claim ownership to the private religious speech of its students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hi, I'm Gene Getz, and I want to congratulate my friend Kerby Anderson and Point of View Radio for 45 years of great broadcasting.
45 years, and we'll probably play a few other clips tomorrow, but once I have Nick Pitts and Brent Taylor in studio, and especially since I was aware of Nick's article, Congressional Fund to Cover Up Sexual Harassment. It's in myfaithvotes.org, but we're also posting it right now on the website, pointofview.net. And, Nick, I'll be honest with you, maybe I've missed it somewhere, but when I heard in a testimony the other week that a member of Congress said, well, of course we know, and at that time she used the figure 17 million. Now you're going to use the figure 25 million. But anyway, millions and millions of dollars of our tax dollars have been used to settle these sexual harassment suits so that there's non-disclosure. I was like, wait a minute, we didn't know that.
Yeah.
What have you learned?
Yeah, so I misspoke. Yeah, it was 17 million. So the only thing more reprehensible than a secret sex fund is the sheer existence of such a fund.
Wow.
Budgets, one, reflect values, and two, budgets anticipate what's going to happen in the future based upon what's happened in the past. And so what we see is that these budgets not only anticipate this type of behavior to continue on, but we also see they're valuable in the sense that they're going to keep it secret. So it's absolutely disgusting. So since 1997, that there have been over 200 payouts to individuals, and then it's totaled upwards of $17 million that the taxpayers' money, hard-earned money, to be able to keep these individuals in a job. Whereas if we did something like that, we'd get canned. I'd get canned quicker than some baked beans. But nevertheless, so here's the process. Here's how the process works, which again is only going to infuriate you as much as it has frustrated the dickens out of me. So a congressional employee is wronged in some form or fashion. That person then files their accusations, but before they can file their accusations, they have to go to the House Compliance Office to be able to find a secret password. When they get the password, that's when they're able to go log on and to be able to get the files. While they get the files, before they can fill out the files, they have to go through counseling or mediation or guidance. This is the victim has to go through counseling, mediation, or guidance.
Unbelievable.
They go through counseling, mediation, or guidance. They're not allowed to say anything. There's non-disclosure act. So the person that's wronged them can continue to go out and perpetrate their wrong while they go through counseling, mediation, or guidance. Then once they go through this process, they're allowed to fill out the form. When they fill out the form, they get submitted to the compliance committee. Then there's a person that says the officer has within 90 days to be able to rule on this. After they rule on it, then it goes to the House ranking member of the House Administration Committee, the ranking Republican and the ranking Democrat. The ranking Republican and Democrat then decide whether a payout's necessary and how much is necessary. When they come to agreement, or if they come to agreement, that's when the money can go. But then non-disclosure acts are littered throughout this entire process. One of the individuals that has come out against this and that has paid out was Blake Farenthold, who's out of Corpus Christi right now. He even testified and said that, yes, I had to get paid out. That someone had to pay out because of some wrongs that I did, even though he denies those wrongs. But he says that the non-disclosure acts kept him from being able to say anything. And what this is, it's the least kept secret, not only in Congress, but it reveals the least kept secret here in America, which is just the pornography addiction that Americans are going through right now. So just some numbers for you relative to our pornographic addiction here in America. In 2016, over 4.5 billion hours were dedicated to watching porn sites. Human beings have spent 1 million years watching porn since 2015. Surveys indicate 79% of American men between ages of 18 and 30 admit to watching porn regularly being defined as once a month. 67% of men watch porn that are between the ages of 31 and 49, and 1 in 3 porn users is a woman. So again, it's not just one gender, though it's favored towards one gender. It's everyone. Hollywood makes 400 movies a year. The porn industry makes 11,000 movies a year. Every second, 28,258 users are watching pornography on the internet. Every second, 28,000 users. This is a significant number, and what it continues to reveal is our porn addiction is lived in virtual reality, but it's a rotten fruit that doesn't give it the intimacy. And so when these individuals are yearning for something more than pornography, what they're doing, one of the ways of things that they're manifesting this and moving it out is by preying upon these individuals.
Wow. You know, when you have an individual that has a button established so that you can push the button to lock the door. Remember last Wednesday we talked about that with a woman that said that's something that happened in Hollywood. The next day we find out, that happened in NBC too.
And so,
the science, they were enablers all the way through this, are there not?
And the science continues to indicate pornography is not just bad for you physically, but it's also physiologically messing with your mind. And so you can't sit and watch this stuff as much as Americans are watching it and not expect it to manifest itself in a variety of other ways, whether it's in the house or whether it's in your marriage or whether it's in, there's just a variety of ways. And I'm sure Brent can attest to this from a pastoral standpoint, though you can't obviously name names, but you've probably counseled individuals that have struggled with this and seen how it's worked its way out in their lives in detrimental ways.
Well, it's an addiction that has plagued our entire country. It's only on the rise, and it's not going the other direction. It is continuing to grow, and it's going to continue to be a problem, and it cannot be something that is not discussed, not talked about. It has to be brought out in the open so that people can understand it and people can get help. You know, it's interesting what you said about these accusers have to go through this litany of action steps they have to take to get secret passwords, to fill out forms, to get counseling. And yet for those who are accused and those who even admit to it, the process they have to go through is basically you say you're sorry, you go to some resort community to get therapy, and then you come back on your whirlwind tour a year later and you're back in the saddle again. And it's ridiculous how that has what's happened there. And we're seeing in Congress, you probably saw in the news where with Conyers how one of his accusers said that he brought up the Chandra Levy situation from years gone by. I mean, there is a threat. If you're going to accuse a member of Congress, you've got to go through these 50 steps and get counseling before you can say anything. And in that process, understand you're going to be attacked. We've got to change our culture. We've got to change what's going on. It doesn't mean that every single accusation that is made is true. They're not all going to be factually based, but at the same time, we have to understand that the sin that is in humanity is going to continue to overflow. And the more that people push God out of society and God out of their lives, why should we expect ungodly people to act godly? That's what's happening in our culture today. We're seeing it fall apart.
And one of the frustrating things is, you talked about the go to therapy component. Well, many of these congressmen aren't even going to therapy. They're staying in their job. Like Blake Farenthold is still in a job. John Conyers held on for as long as he can. Al Franken is still in his job right now. But one of the realities is, one, you can point to the fact that even a New York Times report indicated that this therapy, quote unquote, there's no science behind it. It hasn't been scientifically verified. It is a resort right now. I'm sure there's benefits to it that we don't know about. But from one standpoint, at least what the New York Times is reporting, there's no science behind this. It really is just a kind of a getaway, more of a PR stunt than anything. And then second, we've got to do something to change this, because it's more than just making this out into public. Light is a great disinfectant, and it's easy for us to say this is wrong, because I think we can all agree that sexual harassment and sexual misconduct is wrong. But what can we do to make it right? What can we do to not continue to have this conversation 6 months from now, a year from now? How can we treat women fairly? How can we begin to take this out of the public square is a conversation that I think needs to be happening.
Again, your article that people can read on the Congressional Fund to cover up sexual harassment. Of course, Kelly Shackelford on this program the other day said, well, maybe we should just withdraw any of the pensions of anybody that knew about that. And that goes back to the previous administrations and the previous leaders in Congress, as well as to the current leaders in Congress. So that's one idea, but we're out of time. And Brent and Nick, always great to have you in studio. Let's
do
this
again.
Here
always.
We will take a break, and tomorrow we have some more to talk about. Friday's our weekend edition, all that coming up. We'll see you tomorrow.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature."